$10 for the book. After you hear his message, you're probably going to want one. He's got a few with him today, and he will sign them, of course. And can we give Curtis Roberts a warm welcome, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me out there? So
Hey.
Probably down. All right. There we go. Thank you. We gotta give him the good one. Oh. So I like to start off every time I give a speaking engagement. I like to say the only thing that qualifies me to stand before you is because of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Quite a journey, and so I like to share with you guys about how I ended up to where I'm at today with you. And I do want to say, though, if there's anybody that really love to hear your questions so I can answer what's on your mind, on your heart. That's most important.
I don't mean to interrupt, but if you do have a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic so he can also hear what your question is.
Great, thank you. So I want to start off by saying that there's 5 prisons throughout the United States that are deemed as the most violent prisons in the United States. One of them happens to be in California, named San Quentin State Prison. San Quentin is where California houses its death row inmates. Currently, there is 750 death row inmates housed at San Quentin State Prison. Thanks to Gavin Newsom, right now they're not initiating the death penalty. But so I 9 years in California State Prison, San Quentin. How God got me through that is just stealing $40, and I was being sentenced under what is the law is California 3 strikes. My sentence was 50 years to life. And for anybody sentenced under California 3 strikes, there's no good time, no bad time. You have to do 50 years, no matter how good or how bad you are in prison. So, you know, it was, my initial release date was the year 2044. November of 2044. That was when I was supposed to be released from prison. Now, mind you, I'm not a young man anymore. I went into prison as a young man. I'm now 61 years old. So if you could do the math, I did 29 years in prison. So, but you know, my heart is young. My heart is full of the Holy Spirit and for the love of the Lord. And, you know, there was just so much I just didn't know. I just didn't know. So let me tell you about day one in prison. I arrive at San Quentin. Because my skin color is white, everything in prison is racist by skin color. So the whites come up to me and said, hey, you know, you're new, you need protection. So here's the deal. You got to earn your mud. You got to earn your right to walk this line with the whites and be called as one of us. So they handed me a knife. They said, that guy over there is a child molester. We need you to go stab him. Day one. So I had a decision to make at that point. And I chose not to do it. I said, I'm not going to do that. Even though California labeled me as a violent felon, I didn't believe myself to be a violent felon. I believed myself to be a child of God on one heck of a journey. But nevertheless, I'm still a child of God. So I didn't want to allow outside influence, even prison, even San Quentin, to dictate my behavior. So next thing I know, when I go to the chow hall at San Quentin, the whites are pointing me out. They're pointing me out. So the shot caller of the whites is pointing to his torpedoes. That's the guy. Well, I understand what that means. I mean, anybody, even the newest person in prison, could understand that. So there I was. I had a decision to make. I knew they were coming after me. So I waited for the shot caller that evening. Now I'm on day 2 now. That evening of day 2 of 50 years to life, I waited for the shot caller to jump in the shower. Now, mind you, he had torpedoes stationed at each side of the shower. Well, I jetted in between them. Jumped in there with my full clothes on, my prison boots. Jumped in there, and I told the shot caller, who was about this big, probably as big as Pastor Calvin there, and I said, don't you point at me in the chow hall. You got something to say to me? Say it to me. And he's like, man, you're crazy. I said, you're darn right I am. I don't care if I live or die in here, but you're not going to dictate my program. So he immediately spread the word among the whites. This man's crazy. Leave him alone. Well, that started my sentence. So it led me down a path of walking alone. It was me and Jesus. And that was it. I didn't know what was going to come of this. I didn't know if they're going to really leave me alone. I didn't know how it was going to go. I can tell you what took place for the rest of that week was I also received divorce papers. So my wife at the time sent me divorce papers while I was in prison. So I got 50 years to life. I got divorce papers. Now I find out my home phone is disconnected, and my wife has sold our house and she's taken our child and now vanished. So, I mean, talking about broken. I was so broken before the Lord, and I was just devastated. I didn't know how I landed in prison with 50 years to life. You know, the famous saying that I was sharing just earlier that I have learned, and I hope you learn. You know that the shortest prayer in the Bible is Peter saying, "Help!" hey, man, I want you to know. You know, sometimes God has to take us beyond our theology. And my discovery was that I found him to be wanting me more than I wanted him. Pursued me and pursued me. And I have a master's degree. Let me tell you what I in though. And he said, okay, now you ready to go to work? Are you ready to go to work? And I'm going to say something that I walked the line alone. As soon as I got off my pity pot, God was using me in the prison. God was using me year 20. I got off my pity pot. I'm really in the ministry. I'm serving God. I'm still walking the line alone. And out of all the things I was raped in prison. In prison. I could tell you the exact day about, and the predators come out of the woodwork and they start pointing, we got one, we got one, we got one. And a felon, but I didn't believe myself to be a violent felon. I believed myself to be a child of God, put in a very, very difficult situation. And I remember thinking that I'm a man because God made me a man. I'm not going to do it. So they said, all right, we know who you are. Give us his name. We'll take him out. It would have been that easy. I couldn't even do that. I couldn't give him the name. You know, I believe today that if I would have gave him the name, even though I got released from prison, I would still be in prison. But I'd be in a prison of my own making and my own choosing. But I didn't give him the name. And I was fine. And I was wrestling all this out with God. And it wasn't until the day, it was a Sunday, I'm sitting in the church. They call it the chapel at San Quentin. I'm sitting in the chapel. In walks the guy who raped me. He's in the church. I didn't want God to forgive him. I didn't think it was fair. And you know, God had to remind me. He had to remind me. He had to remind me, hey, look how much I've forgiven you. Why not him? You know, one of the greatest gifts anybody could receive from God is two things. That God will show you you, and at the same time, God will show you him in a very intimate way that many people don't know. My wife says, Curtis, nobody knows God like you do. She says, God has a favor for you. I just know I'm a... I just give it my best. I just real. I'm real with my sins. I'm real with my faults. I'm real being a child of God. I'm real with my joys. And I remember the chaplain there at San Quentin said to me, Curtis, don't ever play poker. It's all on your face. Whatever it is, it's always on your face. And I'm like, okay, I'm good with that. You know, this is the way God made me. So let me stop right here and say, is anybody at this point have a question? Okay, so I want to tell you, yes.
Being a victim of what you're talking about today, is it something that you have to remind yourself of or redecide as you come into these waves of emotions that come as a result of being traumatized like that? Do you have to redecide and rededicate that part of your life to God at all?
Yes and no. I think initially my immediate response is like, no, it's good. Then there's waves, there's times.
Amen.
And given these talks, it leaves me a little vulnerable and fragile. And I have to go through into my little special time with God and my place and allow him to remember, do this. Since Pastor brought that up, I just want to say, look how God used that event. So they did a podcast on my story. San Quentin has a podcast that they do from within the prison. Now, mind you, the administration really, has a heavy hand over that podcast. So the podcast is called Ear Hustle. And if you were to Google Ear Hustle, you'll see it. The story they titled my story was from season 1, episode 8, and it was titled Left Behind. And they titled it Left Behind because everybody else was going home, but I wasn't. So they titled it Left Behind. But in that podcast, the story of the rape came out. And the podcast is being aired out here. And San Quentin has a bunch of schools that do tours, that everybody loves to tour San Quentin because it's so famous of a prison. Politicians, lawyers, governors, judges, whatever, high school students. So this day, high school students were coming into San Quentin, touring San Quentin. They asked the administration, this one little girl, my definition of little girl, she was probably 16, said to the administration, will I get a chance to meet Curtis Roberts today? The administration said, well, why do you want to meet Curtis Roberts? She says to the administration, well, I have a secret to tell him. Well, you know, I'm a convicted felon, and they're not going to allow a 16-year-old girl to come into San Quentin and tell a secret to a convicted felon. So they said, you will get a chance to meet him, but you won't get a chance to speak to him in private. You have to speak to him in front of us. So they allowed it. Here's what she tells me. Curtis, I want to commit suicide. She said, I've been hiding that I was raped. And I heard your story and how you came out. So she says, I knew I had to tell somebody, and you're the first person I've chosen to tell. And she asked me what to do. What the hell? I mean, come on, really. You know, the tours at San Quentin take about 2 hours for them to fully go through every part of the prison. The administration allowed me to spend those 2 hours with her. It was just amazing. I got to walk the whole time with her. And then at the very end, she promised, she gave me a pinky swear. And she promised she was going to go home and tell her mom and dad about the rape. And she promised that she wasn't going to commit suicide. And she said, can I give you a gift? Now, of course, they can't give us gifts. They can't hug us. They can't touch us. I mean, this was a violation, just that much. And I said, well, if you could give me a gift, what gift would you want to give me? And she says to me, she says, I'd want to give you a puppy. You know, I'm supposed to be this hardened criminal. I remember I had to turn my back to her and just walk away crying. It was just such a moving. That wasn't the only time that God has brought somebody to me sharing their secret. Isn't that amazing that God would use this tragedy, but he's bringing it, and his people are coming into the light and getting healed through that horrible, horrible experience. So one God moment I got to share is, so the podcast, Ear Hustle podcast, mine, Left Behind, it's going out worldwide. In the prison, I'm receiving letters from Germany, Canada, Australia. All these people are writing me and encouraging me, don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. And so one high school, out of everywhere that this podcast is being heard, one high school decided to use my story as a classroom project. And where they had every student in that classroom out of this high school write me a letter. And with the permission from the high school and the prison, that I was able to receive those letters, and I was able to write one letter back to each student, which I did. Now, let me tell you about this high school. The high school is called Sequoia High School in Redwood City. Guess what high school I graduated from? They had no clue No clue what they were doing. So when I wrote them back, and I wrote the teacher back, her name's Justine. I said, Miss Justine, I said, thank you for the letters. I said, but I want you to do me a favor. I said, will you go to your library, pull out the yearbooks from 1976, 1977, 1978, 1979. See if you can find my picture. So one part about this story is I have no pictures of me as a child. None. I don't know my mom and dad. I'm not attached to my siblings. I have nothing. I have no photos of me as a little boy. Guess what that school had? And guess what they sent me into that prison? Pictures of me as a little boy that were in that yearbook. And I thought that was the only detail that only God knew. Only God knew that detail and me. I told nobody. And now God made sure, which ended up in this book right here, those pictures are in this book. God made sure that I had pictures of my childhood. So the day I got paroled from San Quentin, which I'll tell you how that happened. The day I got paroled from San Quentin, guess who had a welcome home day? Sequoia High School had a welcome home day for Curtis Roberts, where they had media, they had camera crews, they had the students, the principal. They had all these people escorting me through the school and asking me what I remember, and what, and I didn't remember anything, but it was all throughout the hallways. They had these TV monitors, and they had a picture of me and the podcast, and they said, "Welcome home, Curtis. This day's for you." It was. I mean, was I not wrong when I said, "But God"? So here's how I got out, and here's how I ended up here. So I'm doing these tours. The administration had asked me to speak to these tours that are coming in. One day, the tour that comes into San Quentin was Stanford Law students. But not just any Stanford Law students. These were third-year Stanford Law students who were prosecutors. They are already in the field of prosecuting people like me. So here they are standing before me. There's like 30 of them, and their professor. So they go down the line of, there's 7 inmates that are chosen by the administration. All of them got murder. 15 to life, 19 to life, 20 to life. The highest is 25 to life. All these murders. Then they get to me. Well, what's your sentence? 50 years to life. And they're like, well, how'd that happen? So I tell them my story. And they said, we want to challenge you on your statement that you were sent to prison for a crime you didn't do. We want to challenge you. We're not your attorney, but we want to challenge you on that. We need you to sign a release form. I said, deal. Do it. 6 months later, Stanford Law comes back to San Quentin saying, we want to represent you. We want to help you get out. We found out the truth, which is in the book, that the prosecutor at that time had withheld evidence that would have exonerated me. And it's called a Brady violation. And the professor at Stanford Law, his name is George Fisher, never charged me a penny, never asked anything of me. He said, because he used him being a prosecutor, he used his connections in that field to find out the truth, which finally came out 27 years after the fact. And the part that I did not know, which was the miracle of God setting the stage for my freedom, was this, that people had graduated Stanford Law, had become attorneys that are now working in Governor Jerry Brown's office as his attorneys. So George Fisher used his connection to tell these attorneys now working for the governor of California about me. The governor of California sends me an application for clemency. Doesn't mean it's approved. He's just saying, here's an application. Lots of inmates get applications. So I fill it out in pencil. I walk into the chaplain at San Quentin and I say, hey, let's pray over this. Let's pray over this application before we send it in. And so we prayed over it and sent it in. I would like you to know that it wasn't a week, it wasn't 2 weeks, it wasn't a month, it wasn't 6 months, it wasn't even a year. It was years later that Governor Jerry Brown sent a representative from his office to San Quentin to interview me and talk to me. He wanted to see me face to face and make his decision. So there's a team of these lawyers right here, and they're shooting these questions at me. But you know, they're doing this. When they're shooting those questions, they're doing this. They're looking down. It's like they just have all these questions that were just kind of formatted. And they're just not even looking at me, but they're just saying these questions. So finally, I said this. I said, excuse me. And they kind of startled me. They look up at me. I said, what if I'm telling the truth? And it shook him. And he looked at me like he didn't look before. It's like he never even thought about that. What if this guy's telling the truth? Did we really incarcerate somebody for 29 years for stealing $40? Is that what we're doing here in California? Never shot a gun, been in 2 fights. What the hell? Is this what we're doing? So for California to release an inmate who's sentenced under California 3 strikes, 3 things must take place. 1, the interview. You got to pass that interview. At least to get it is a big deal. I passed the interview. Next, CDCR, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, they have to approve you being released. That means they have to say you are a model inmate, which is very rare. They approved it. The third and final step was this. The California Supreme Court, 4 out of the 7 justices have to agree to release this inmate. Isn't that crazy? Now, I'm just going to, because it's a thorn in my side, I'm just going to say this. If I had committed a murder, if I had kicked in your door and shot somebody in your family, and if the governor decided to release me, Governor Jerry Brown, he could do it with 1 signature. A guy who committed a murder, but not a California 3 striker. He does not have the authority to do it, not without taking these steps. So in November of 2018, the California Supreme Court agreed to release Curtis Roberts. So on Christmas Eve of 2018, I get called into the warden's office, and the warden says, you know why you're here? I'm playing dumb at this point. No, I have no clue. He said, the governor's on the phone. You need to sit down. I went from 50 years to life with a release date of 2044. The governor said to me, I have ordered San Quentin to release you. You have 5 days. I can tell you this, that the next conscious thought I had, I don't remember leaving the warden's office. I to the lower yard of San Quentin, and all these inmates were around me saying, what happened, what happened, what happened? That was my next conscious thought. I'm on the lower yard, and these inmates are asking me, what happened, what happened? And I'm telling them, I'm going home. I'm going home. So how did I get to Springfield, Illinois? So, you know, I think God has such a sense of humor. So my wife is, she's a RN, she's a nurse. She's been a nurse for 35 years, born and raised here in Illinois. She's from Peoria, Illinois. Out of the blue, she decides, I'm going to move to California. So she moves to California in 2018. And I told her, hey, by the way, I have a plan. And here's the plan. I'm going to move you from Peoria, and I'm going to move you to California, and I got this guy that's getting out of prison. He just did 29 years, but don't worry. So just go to California. You're going to find the man of your dreams. Could you imagine God sharing that part of the story with her? She would have never left. So December 31st, 2018, I get released from San Quentin. I'm in a transitional house in San Francisco. The guys there are telling me about this, because I've never had a cell phone. I get my first cell phone on December 31st, 2018. I don't know how to use it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. So the guy says, hey, there's these dating apps on these cell phones. I'm like, oh, you can meet women? I'm like, this is great. After 29 years, you know, I really want to meet a woman. And so, first girl I meet on there, girl named Laura. So she says to me, she says, hey, let's go have some coffee. And I'm like, well, it's not that easy. I can't do that. So she says, well, why? What's wrong? And I said, just hold on. Let me tell you something. Go listen to this podcast. I want you to go hear the Ear Hustle podcast and hear my story. It's titled Left Behind. And if you still want to have that cup of coffee, we'll have it. She texts me back. She says, I still want to have that cup of coffee. I said, I'll tell you what. I'm preaching at a church on Easter Sunday in Mill Valley. It's called Miller Avenue Church. I said, if you want to meet me, come there. You can hear me preach. She has not left my side since. She's not here today. I like to drag her to these events because her and I have a different understanding of how we got married. So if you guys see this on my finger, 21 diamonds and 11 rubies. So we've known each other for like 3 weeks. And say she proposed to me. So for 29 years, I never had a nickname in prison. But now that I'm out of prison, I have a new nickname. And my nickname is Big Daddy. So I got this nurse to propose to me. So I get licensed and ordained we're running this church in Mill Valley called Miller Avenue Church. And God is just blessing our lives. And she said, hey, I want to fly you to Illinois, and I want to know if you will come meet my kids. I haven't met her kids yet. We're married now, and I still haven't met her kids. One of her kids is a cop. And I've only spoken to her over the phone, and she says, I know all about you, so don't you lie. I'm like, oh, all right, no problem. And so anyway, my wife Laura says to her kids, just meet them. If you don't like them, fine, but just meet them. So I met them, and one of her kids said that they're getting ready to have a grandbaby. So my wife says, I seen the look on her face when she knew that she was gonna have a grandbaby, and I said, we need to move to Illinois, don't we? So we bought a home. I mean, God just had this amazing home for us. It's a lot bigger than a prison cell, mind you. It happens to have like 6 bedrooms, and it's like 2,000 square feet. And it's just amazing. And we got this great deal on it. We live in Southern View. You guys know where that's at? And I don't know how I got from a prison cell to here. It's quite shocking. But God, and my wife is still waiting for that grandbaby. We're waiting. One part of this story I need to share before I get off this mic is this. That, you know, God knows your heart when you think he doesn't, and you might think that he forgot you. Remember the wife that divorced me when I first went into prison, that took that child from me? At that time, that child was 5 years old. So I did a speaking engagement in January of this year in a city called Lacey, Washington. And guess who I got to meet? That little girl who's now no longer 5. She's 30-something years old. God brought her back into my life. I remember she wrapped her arms around me and she called me Daddy. And she says, I have a surprise for you. You know, God says, me and my daughter back, or even my freedom. But God did even more. God gave me 3 grandbabies. And he's just been heaping these blessings on me, and it's so crushing. It's overwhelming. It's like waves of love just keep flowing on me. And I get these texts from my grandbabies, my granddaughters now, and they call me Grandpa. It's like, and just today, one of my grandbabies, her name's Jessica. She's turning 14. Her birthday's next week, and I got to send her out a gift today. The first time I was able to send her a gift, and I feel like I'm 6'5", 300 pounds, you know. I just feel like a king. It is the best feeling ever to be Grandpa and Dad and just Curtis, no longer inmate with the prison number of E25212. God put all that to rest. Thank you. If anybody has a question, I'll be more than happy to answer a question. If not, that concludes my very long testimony, but I love bragging about God. So I have one daughter, and she's 30-something, but I have 3 grandkids. There's Jessica, who's just turning 14. There's Haley, I think she's 9. And then there's Noah, and I think he's 4. So that's the ages of the other kids. So thank you guys for hearing, and thank you. Never give up on God. He has a plan.
If anybody would like to get a book, just come on up and see Curtis here. We're going to put the books right over here on this table by the fan. And they are, again, $15. He'd love to sign one for you. And it is a good read. I just finished it. So we are going to, at noon, we're going to try to kick this food off. And we thank you all again for coming. We are serving food at noon and 5 today. And then we've got some music for you coming on. We've got Levi and the family, I do believe, is going to play some music for us. And then we've got another group coming on at 2 o'clock. And is it 2? 12 to 1, 1 to 3. So we got music till up here right at noon.